Breaking Jasmine Crockett, just exposed. What Trump's team feared most. It didn't start with a bang. It started with a whisper on live national television. No shouting, no warning, no bombastic showmanship. Just one sentence, delivered calmly, surgically. And when it landed, it hit like a missile. Because based on your recent statements, it doesn't seem like you understood a single word of it. That was the moment. Cameras froze mid-pan. Reporters looked up from their notes. Advisors stopped texting. You could feel it across the country living rooms, school libraries, diners in Iowa. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. At the center of it sat Jasmine Crockett, upright, still, and terrifyingly clear. She wasn't angry. She wasn't yelling. She was holding a document, one that bore Donald Trump's signature. And in less than 10 seconds, she had just implied to a national audience that the former president of the United States had signed something he didn't read. The kind of implication that doesn't just raise eyebrows, it rewires trust. Trump, once the master of the media moment, didn't control this one. He wasn't in the room, but he was the room. Every camera, every eye, every breath drawn in the House Oversight Committee was waiting for the aftershock. And it came not from Crockett, but from Mar-a-Lago. Hundreds of miles away in a cream-colored room filled with gold trim and silent aides, Donald Trump stood up so fast his chair tipped. The TV was muted, but the image on screen told him everything he needed to know. Crockett holding that document, her eyes steady, her tone precise. She'd planned this. He was sure of it. She said, "I didn't read it." On live TV, he barked. His aides didn't move. One flinched. Another glanced at the remote still on the carpet. Trump paced, muttered, ranted, then reached for his phone. Truth Social, his sanctuary, his sword, his impulse. His fingers flew typos, repetition, rage, bleeding through every letter. She's a disgrace. No class. Lied on TV. Defamatory. Document fake. Everyone knows I'm a reader. Best reader. Ask anyone. He paused, breathed, blinked, handed the phone to his aide. Fix the spelling. Make it punch harder. But it wasn't the spelling. It was the tone. And across the country, the internet had already begun its diagnosis. Screenshots, hashtags, split-screen TikToks. One video looped Crockett's line and slowed it down for dramatic effect. Another put it to a bass drop. Trump can't read. Das Gaster Oversight Showdown. Das Astars Crockett clap back. In under 30 minutes, it was everywhere. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Because people weren't just watching a political spat. They were watching a moment of clarity, a reckoning. The man who had once held the nuclear codes was now under fire, not for what he said, but for what he signed, and couldn't explain. No press secretary could fix it. No campaign slogan could override the footage, because the document was real, because the signature was real, and because the question was even more real. If he didn't read this, what else didn't he read? America paused, not in outrage, but in something colder, doubt. And that was the true scandal, not the signature, not the TV clip, not the typo-ridden rant, but the silence that followed, because even people who'd voted for him once stayed quiet. Because even conservative pundits stumbled. Because even in Fox's newsroom, there were glances exchanged and mics quietly muted. This wasn't a partisan hit job. It was something worse. It was believable. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She didn't smile. She just asked the one question Trump never expected. "You signed this, didn't you?" And with that, the game was no longer his. It was hers. And America was watching. The question lingered long after the clip ended. "You signed this, didn't you?" It wasn't rhetorical. It was surgical, delivered with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the answer. And that's what made it lethal. Because everyone watching from the committee chamber to the couches in suburban Ohio understood something very clearly. Jasmine Crockett hadn't stumbled into that moment. She'd set the trap and waited. And Trump walked right in. The document she held didn't just have his signature. It had his contradiction. Let's rewind the tape. Just 7 days before that hearing, Trump stood in a crowded town hall in Reno, Nevada. The stage was decked out in flags, the lighting perfect for TV. He looked into the camera and declared, "These CEO tax loopholes corrupt. They rob the working class. I'll shut every single one of them down." Applause erupted. He doubled down. "I'm for the little guy, not these guys raking in millions and avoiding taxes." It was clear, unambiguous. But what Crockett had in her hand, what she carefully placed into the congressional record, told a different story. Page 19 of that document, 42 pages total, spelled out the expansion of a corporate tax loophole, a quiet reversal of a previous cap. The language was dense, cloaked in finance speak. But the meaning was simple. Companies could now write off bigger executive bonuses disguised as performance incentives. In plain English, big businesses just got a green light to dodge more taxes. And Trump had signed it. That was the core of Crockett's blow. She wasn't just pointing out hypocrisy. She was unveiling strategy, a playbook of performance over policy. And Trump's response, impulsive, emotional, and filled with typos, only confirmed what the silence in that room had already suggested. He never read it. He never even looked. And now caught in the act, the only tool he had left was rage. But Crockett had facts. She cited the section, held up the signature, laid out the timeline. No dramatics, no ad-libs, just cold hard reality. And it cut deeper than any insult ever could, because this wasn't just about Trump. This was about the system that let him do it. The aides who summarized, the staffers who printed readable versions, the legal team who knew he wouldn't flip to page 19. This was about the machinery behind the illusion, an illusion now unraveling on national TV. Back in the hearing room, the committee chair shifted uncomfortably. One Republican member tried to interject, but stopped himself. There was nothing to say, not yet, because the video was already being clipped. Social media had latched on, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. The idea of someone powerful signing something they didn't understand, too many people had lived it. Landlords, loan officers, bosses, judges. So, this wasn't just a takedown, it was a collective flashback, and that's why it stuck. The phrase he didn't read, it wasn't just trending, it was resonating. On talk radio in Pennsylvania, in PTA meetings in Colorado, on message boards in Texas. Suddenly Crockett wasn't just a representative, she was a symbol, not of resistance, but of responsibility. And Trump, he was becoming something else, something more dangerous than offensive. He was becoming embarrassing, even among his own. At Mar-a-Lago, damage control was in full swing. His team scrambled. It was a staff oversight. The language was added late. It's being misrepresented, but none of it stuck, because he had already posted, already claimed he wrote the document, and that lie, so easily disproven, torpedoed every defense his team tried to spin. CNN fact-checked it live. Bloomberg broke down the tax clause line by line. Even conservative news sites started to tiptoe away. Privately, his staff was unraveling. One aide reportedly whispered he handed her the weapon. She just pulled the trigger. And Crockett. She didn't blink. She didn't tweet. She didn't campaign on it. She just moved on. Because for her, this wasn't a viral moment. It was a warning that a man who once led the free world had signed away tax protections for the middle class without even knowing it. That his signature had power, but no understanding behind it. And that no one, not his staff, not his supporters, not his own pride, could undo what was already on paper. Back in Washington, a small group of Democratic strategists watched the clip again. One of them leaned forward and whispered, "She didn't shout. She held up a receipt." And that's all it took. Because in politics, the most powerful thing isn't volume, it's proof. And Crockett had it. Black ink, white paper, one name, Trump. He signed it, and he couldn't unsign it. He signed it, and he couldn't unsign it. That was the moment the panic began. Not in public, not right away. But in the places where damage control usually starts, closed doors, muted conference lines, and group chats labeled comms emergency. Because Trump's signature wasn't just on the document, it was now plastered across every screen in America. Anchors were circling it on live broadcasts. TikToks were zooming in on it with red arrows and ominous baselines. Fact-checkers were overlaying it with clips of his Reno speech, shut down corporate tax cheats, and then cutting directly to page 19 of the bill he'd approved. The contradiction wasn't up for debate anymore. It was evidence, and it was viral. And in Mar-a-Lago, that meant one thing: Trump was spiraling. He'd already posted once, sloppy, impulsive, frantic, claiming he wrote the doc and has the best comprehension skills. The kind of post that even his most loyal aides couldn't defend, not with a straight face. Not this time. So now they were in full containment mode. It was just past 11:00 p.m. The private suite upstairs smelled of cold cheeseburgers and overused cologne. 3 advisors sat in silence as Trump paced. His phone was in his hand again. Everyone was praying he wouldn't open the app. But he did. "Should I say she forged it?" he asked. Nobody responded. She had it planned. She's working with the deep files, whatever that is. Borkin, his longtime advisor, tried to intervene gently. "Sir, the document's on file. It's stamped and published. There's no—" "I don't care," Trump snapped. "This is betrayal. Someone gave it to her. I want names. I want them fired. I want to hit back. He wasn't looking for strategy. He wanted revenge. Dana, the comms advisor, texted someone from the media team under the table. We can't stop him. He's about to make it worse. It wasn't just anger now. It was humiliation. Crockett hadn't insulted his intelligence directly, but she hadn't needed to. The internet had filled in the blanks. Meme after meme mocked his post. One showed a kindergarten classroom with Trump front and center, holding a spelling book upside down. Another turned his Truth Social rant into a Mad Libs worksheet. And underneath the jokes was something far more dangerous doubt, not from his enemies, but from his own base. In a Facebook group with nearly 200,000 members, one longtime supporter commented, "I love Trump, but why lie about writing it? It's not helping, makes us look dumb." That comment got more likes than the post it was replying to, and for the first time Trump's defenders weren't shouting, they were hesitating. At 8:03 the next morning, Trump's senior comms team gathered in the second-floor conference room at Mar-a-Lago. They called it the morgue. Heavy drapes, no windows, glass table that echoed every nervous shuffle. No one liked being in there, but they had no choice. He'd gone rogue, again. Colleen Darrow, PR strategist, didn't waste time. The post made it worse. The typos alone gave them everything they needed. Ray Mengen, a younger aide in sneakers and a suit jacket, leaned in. "Do we think Crockett planned this?" "She didn't need to," Colleen replied. He handed her the weapon. Silence. The kind that settles in your bones. Then Glenn Borkin spoke. "He doesn't want us on camera, any of us, not today. Maybe not for a while." "You're saying we're going dark?" Ray asked. Borkin nodded. "He says we're not defending him hard enough, says we're too careful. How the hell are we supposed to defend him when we don't even know what was in that document?" Everyone turned to Reza Feldman, the legal liaison. She looked exhausted. Her coffee had gone cold. "It was a tax-related initiative," she said. "Signed during a private briefing in Indiana. He got a 2-page summary. The full document was 42 pages. And he didn't read it." "No," she said plainly. "We tried. He didn't want to waste time with numbers." The sentence dropped like a stone. Not because it was shocking, but because it was what everyone already suspected and had never said out loud. They'd built a system around his shortcuts. Bullet-pointed memos, highlighted summaries, color-coded flashcards. Now that system had failed, publicly. Colleen folded her arms. "We're running a campaign for a man who won't read what he signs and attacks anyone who points it out," Borkin added, "and doubles down on it like it's strength." Deborah Quinn, the campaign manager who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. "If Crockett has more, and she might, we're not just looking at a meme storm, we're looking at collapse." Ray turned back to Borkin. "What's his mood now?" Paranoid Borkin said. "He thinks there's a leak, thinks she's working with deep files, whatever that means." The word chilled the room, not because it was conspiratorial, but because they'd heard it before. Betrayal. That word always came before someone got exiled. Publicly, loudly, and with career-ending force. And all of them had signed NDAs that Trump probably never even read. "You want loyalty," Deborah said finally. "He's got it, but don't confuse loyalty with silence." The room shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Something had cracked. They were no longer defending a candidate. They were managing a liability. And while they whispered in damage control mode, the internet had already decided. The man who prided himself on instinct swagger and being the smartest in the room had just proven he couldn't even be bothered to read the room, much less the fine print. And worse, he'd bragged about it. Crockett hadn't shouted. She held up a document and let the silence do the talking. But now, everyone else was talking, and not just on Twitter. The silence that Jasmine Crockett had mastered on camera had cracked open a conversation that couldn't be contained. Not by spin, not by outrage, not even by Trump's relentless posting. Because now the talking wasn't coming from pundits or politicians, it was coming from voters. And that terrified his team more than any headline ever could. In barbershops in Detroit over breakfast in Kansas, diners on the porches of Georgia, people were talking. Not about policy, not about party lines, but about something far more personal. You ever signed something you didn't understand? That question became a litmus test. At a union hall in Pittsburgh, one worker admitted, "Yeah, once. Got screwed on a car loan. Never again." In a Facebook comment under a viral clip of Crockett's moment, a woman posted, "This hit me harder than I expected. I've been there. They hide stuff in paperwork and you don't know until it's too late." That was the shift. It wasn't political anymore. It was human. And Trump, once a symbol of brute force certainty, now stood at the center of a very different kind of conversation. One about trust negligence, and the cost of faking it. He'd always leaned on bravado, but bravado doesn't fix a signature, especially one attached to page 19 of a 42-page tax bill that gave breaks to the exact CEOs he'd railed against a week earlier. By Friday morning, the story had left the political bubble entirely. Cable news was catching up, but they were late. The momentum was happening in spaces they couldn't control. Discord chats, TikTok, edits, Reddit threads, small-town radio. One retired Marine posted a video that went nuclear 2 million views in under 36 hours. I read every damn page of the Constitution in boot camp. Every word he said holding up his tattered manual. If you want my respect, you read what you sign. The comments were flooded with support. Veterans, teachers, small business owners, even former Trump voters chimed in. Not gonna lie, I defended him for years. This hit different. I don't care who you vote for. This stuff matters. I made excuses before. I can't do it this time. And that's when the walls really started shaking. Inside Trump's operation, the strategy meetings turned grim. Not because of the jokes, but because they weren't jokes anymore. They were doubts, the worst kind, quiet, creeping, the kind that spreads without needing to shout. Colleen Darrow, the PR advisor who'd spent years polishing Trump's image, said it out loud in one of the now daily crisis check-ins. This one's different. Glenn Borkin looked up from his phone. Because it's about competence, no, she said. Because it makes people feel stupid for defending him. That landed hard. Because they all knew it was true. Trump's supporters hadn't abandoned him when he insulted people or lied or fumbled through speeches. But this was different. This made them question their own judgment. He hadn't just made a mistake. He'd made them defend the idea that reading doesn't matter. And that was a bridge too far. Meanwhile, Crockett wasn't celebrating. She wasn't doing press tours. She was preparing, because she knew what was coming. The smear campaign started small, an old photo here, a cropped clip there. Right-wing influencers scrambled for dirt. She was a radical lawyer. She defended criminals. She's doing this for attention. But the attacks didn't land, because Crockett didn't rise to them. She stayed calm. Steady, clear. She went on NPR, explained the tax clause in plain English. Then she went on PBS and walked through the timeline signature statement. Contradiction. No gloating, no fire. Just facts. When you have power, she said, you have a duty to read what you sign. Otherwise, you're playing games with people's lives. That quote stuck. It was clipped, shared, framed in teachers' classrooms. In Sacramento, a high school civics teacher used it in a lesson. She printed out Trump's tax bill, had the students read page 19, then played Trump's town hall clip. Now she said, compare them. One student muttered, so, he lied. No, the teacher said. He didn't understand what he signed, and pretended he did. That's worse. In a bar in Ohio, a man named Javier watched that same clip on local news. He ran a landscaping business, 7 employees. He'd voted for Trump once. As the anchors discussed the bill, he turned to his wife. I thought he was on our side. She didn't look up. He said he was. Javier just stared at the screen, and something shifted. Not anger, embarrassment, the kind that doesn't yell. It just stays quiet. That quiet was everywhere now. Anne Crockett. She never raised her voice. She just read the fine print. Anne showed the country what it said. Trump's second post, hit that night. Jasmine Crockett is a liar and fraud, it began. All caps, misspellings, ranting tone, I sign documents every day. Best comprehension skills, better than Sleepy Joe or Barack Hussein. She should be removed from Congress, immediately. The internet exploded again, but this time the laughter was sharper. One user reposted with the caption, Sir, are you okay? Another underlined each misspelled word in red, and still Crockett said nothing. She didn't have to. The louder Trump got, the clearer her point became. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about the people watching. The single mom who'd signed a lease with hidden fees, the vet who'd missed a benefit deadline because of bureaucratic jargon, the retiree who'd trusted a financial advisor and lost half their savings. They saw Trump now, and for the first time, they saw themselves. Not in power, but in vulnerability. And the difference, they didn't have aides. They didn't have summary pages. They had consequences. And Trump had cameras, but not this time. This time the cameras belonged to Crockett, and all she had to do was tell the truth. That was the weapon Trump never saw coming. Not a leak, not a scandal. Not some elaborate trap, just a woman with a piece of paper and the audacity to read it. Because in a world saturated with noise, Crockett's calm clarity wasn't just refreshing, it was revolutionary. The more Trump raged, the smaller he looked. The more she stood still, the larger she became. And now the story wasn't just about the document. It was about what happened next. The unraveling. Inside Trump's camp, things were splintering fast. The day after his Jasmine Crockett post, the second-floor conference room at Mar-a-Lago filled early. 8 people, none smiling, no pastries, just lukewarm coffee and dread. Colleen Darrow was the first to speak. Every time we put a fire out, he throws another match. Borkin didn't argue. He was tired. They all were. This one's different, he said. This one makes people feel stupid for defending him. Everyone nodded. That was the gut punch they'd been circling for days. Trump's spiral wasn't just damaging his image. It was damaging theirs, the staffers who'd sworn loyalty, the advisors who'd told themselves he's just being strategic, the believers who'd clapped when he promised to drain swamps and take down elites. Now they were being asked to explain how a man who couldn't articulate a single line of a 42-page bill was still qualified to lead. And they didn't have an answer. They had silence. And silence spreads. In church basements in South Carolina, pastors changed their tone. In Iowa, a conservative sheriff told a reporter off the record, "I wouldn't let a rookie deputy sign a report he didn't read. Why should I excuse it from a former president?" That wasn't rebellion. That was erosion. Slow, subtle, permanent. Trump didn't notice, because Trump doesn't listen. He reacts. And right now, he was reacting like a man cornered by reality. His third post came at 12:42 a.m. on Truth Social. All these phonies saying, "I didn't read the doc. Wrong, I read more than anyone. I've read thousands of docs, millions way more than crooked Biden, or that fraud Obama. I don't need to read. My instincts are perfect." That was the post that tipped it. Not because it was more erratic than usual, but because of what it admitted without meaning to. "I don't need to read." That line. It wasn't defiance, it was confession. And it confirmed what everyone was already whispering. He hadn't read it, he never read it, and he thought that made him strong. Crockett never addressed the post directly. Her office released a single sentence the next morning. "We encourage all elected officials to fully read and understand the documents they sign. No fire, no fury, just policy." And that's why it worked. Because for the first time in a long time, the American public wasn't looking for a fight. They were looking for an adult. By now, the full document was public. Page 19 had been dissected by everyone from legal experts on CNN to influencers on TikTok. The language was clear. The protections for corporate tax breaks were not only expanded, they were buried under layers of misleading phrasing. Executive incentive thresholds sounded harmless. But what it really meant was rich people win again. And Trump had signed it. The same man who stood on a stage in Reno and shouted about corrupt CEO write-offs had put his pen on the paper that made those write-offs easier. That contradiction wasn't a gaffe. It was policy betrayal. And now it was catching fire. Bloomberg ran a special segment called The Fine Print Presidency. CNBC brought on small business owners to explain how the loophole would hurt them. Even Fox News hesitated. One host asked carefully, if he didn't read this one, how many others went unread? That was the question. And it wasn't going away. Meanwhile, Crockett's story began to spread. Not just what she said in that hearing, but who she was before she got there. Old clips surfaced grainy video of her walking into courtrooms in a cheap suit, juggling case files, defending tenants, protecting women from abusive landlords, translating legal jargon for people who couldn't afford a lawyer. People started to understand this wasn't political theater for her. It was personal. She'd spent years fighting against the exact kind of carelessness Trump had just embodied. The man who saw documents as photo ops, the woman who saw them as lifelines. That contrast wasn't just powerful, it was undeniable. And while Trump screamed online, she was booked on 3 networks in one day: NPR, MSNBC, PBS. She never raised her voice. She just repeated her question. If signing a document means nothing to you, then leadership means nothing to you. That quote traveled. Veterans repeated it. Small business owners shared it. Parents explained it to their kids. And in campaign offices across the country, strategists on both sides held their breath. Because this wasn't a flash in the pan. It was a referendum, not just on Trump, on the way we choose our leaders, on what we expect from them, and on what we excuse. The headlines weren't screaming anymore, but the conversations hadn't stopped. They'd just gotten quieter, deeper, and more dangerous. Because once you admit the emperor might not be reading, you start looking closer at everyone else too. That was the real shift. Not in the polls, not in the headlines, but in the mirror. A national one. held up not with fury but with frightening clarity. For years, people had excused things they never would have accepted in a boss, a friend, a neighbor. They'd overlooked sloppiness, ignored contradictions, waved off lies as just Trump being Trump. But this time, it was different. Because reading the fine print isn't a political issue, it's a responsibility issue. And Jasmine Crockett had made that plain. Not with accusations, not with dramatics, but with one cold, quiet question. Did you even read it? By now, it was more than a soundbite. It had become a litmus test for leadership. Local newspapers started picking it up. Editorials asked if school board members, mayors, and even state senators were reading what they signed. In Sacramento, the civics teacher who used the document in her classroom shared that a parent had emailed her, thanking her for finally making my kid care about politics. In Texas, a church bulletin quietly included a line about seeking wisdom before signing. And in D.C., other lawmakers began to weigh in, carefully, cautiously. A Republican Congresswoman from Arizona issued a bland but unmistakable statement. All lawmakers, regardless of party, should be held to the same standard of accountability. Reading the documents we approve is not optional. Translation, Crockett was right, even if they wouldn't say her name. But one person did, loudly. And it shocked everyone. Melinda Rausch, Trump's former education advisor, a woman who had stood behind him at rallies, smiled next to him at policy announcements, defended him on Sunday shows. She went live on a podcast, looked straight into the camera, and dropped the hammer. "I've written hundreds of memos for him," she said. "We were trained to make it short, loud, and simple. He didn't have patience for nuance. That's fine when you're selling hats, not when you're signing laws." That quote exploded, not because of its content, but because of the source. She wasn't a critic, she was an insider, and suddenly the illusion was impossible to maintain. Trump hadn't skimmed a document. He had coasted on instinct for years and gotten away with it, until now. Because now the receipts were on the table, and Crockett hadn't just caught him slipping, she'd caught him bluffing, and then something even stranger happened. The memes stopped, the hashtags faded. The energy online didn't disappear, it shifted. People weren't laughing anymore, they were thinking. And that's always more dangerous than mockery. In Alabama, a retiree who had once phone banked for Trump told a friend over lunch, "I feel embarrassed. We made excuses," said the media twisted him. But this was just him, talking and showing us who he is. His friend didn't gloat, just nodded. That's where the real reckoning was happening, not on TV, but in conversations like that, at gas stations, at dinner tables, in truck cabs, and teacher lounges, and factory break rooms. Because the question Crockett asked Trump wasn't just for him. It was for everyone. Did you read it? Do you understand what you're agreeing to? Are you letting people bluff their way through decisions that shape your life? Because that's what leadership without accountability looks like, and we've normalized it. We've let charisma become a substitute for competence. Let performance outshine preparation. Let volume override values. We've stopped asking questions because we're afraid of the answers. But Crockett wasn't afraid. She didn't yell, she didn't grandstand, she just did her homework. And that somehow was revolutionary, not because it was flashy, but because it was rare, and that's what made it stick. People started saying it out loud. She's not playing the game. She actually gives a damn. She reminds me of my sister fighting with the landlord. By the end of the week, more stories emerged. People who had lost money homes, security because they'd signed something they didn't understand. And now they were watching someone powerful do the same. Except he wouldn't admit it. They didn't hate him for it. They recognized it. But they were tired of pretending it was okay. Because ignorance in power isn't harmless. It's dangerous. It leads to tax policies that benefit the rich, to contracts that hurt veterans, to deregulations that poison water and erase safeguards. And it all starts with a pen. So Crockett's question became something else, a movement. Not a protest, not a campaign, a quiet shift. One that said, enough. We deserve leaders who read. We deserve people who prepare. We deserve representatives who see their job as responsibility, not performance. And Trump, he kept posting, kept lashing out, kept digging deeper. Because that's what happens when someone who's never had to be accountable is finally cornered by the truth. He thought he could shout over it. He couldn't. Because the truth isn't loud. It's clear. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So, what do we take from this? Was it just a viral moment, a political punchline, a flash of internet drama that will fade in a few news cycles? Maybe, but maybe it was something more. Maybe it was a wake-up call, that we've been too casual with power, too forgiving of recklessness, too silent when it matters most. Maybe it reminded us that democracy isn't about fan clubs. It's about accountability, about standards, about expecting the people who sign our futures to read what they're signing. That's not partisan, that's human. And maybe that's the beginning of something better. Not louder, but smarter. Not flashier, but stronger. Because if we want leaders who take the job seriously, we have to take our vote seriously. We have to ask better questions. And when someone flinches when they deflect, when they rage when they post at midnight like a teenager caught cheating, we know what to do. We hold the line. We remember Crockett's question. And we ask it again. To every politician, every candidate, every person who wants power. Did you even read it?